Juan Soto finally had a big game at Citi Field. Unfortunately, it came in a loss.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor and where we just did our power rankings today. I was up crazy late last night writing these power rankings, and the New York Mets were number one on our power rankings, so blame us at Just Baseball for the jinx as they have lost this series to the Diamondbacks. Ultimately, when you look at this series and what happened to the New York Mets, there were missed opportunities. I think that's a credit to how good this team is, that they're still creating some chances to win these games, but they ran into two really good pitchers, and you can't lose sight of that with Corbin Burnes and Zach Gallen. The Mets bullpen is in a state of flux right now, and that has made everything more challenging. And then they were also sort of due for some regression in the game today. Max Kranick and Reed Garrett, two guys who have been unbelievable this year, they both give up solo home runs. They still pitched well. They just got hit with a couple of home runs. And again, you run into an ace in Zach Gallen that hasn't been good all year. He was great today. And that was really the story of the early part of this game. And really, I think, again, it's the overriding point of this series. Corbin Burnes and Zach Gallen won this series for the Diamondbacks. And going into this season, speaking of our power rankings at Just Baseball, we had the Diamondbacks ranked, I think, number 5 going into the year, ahead of the Padres, ahead of the Giants. Now, they have slid back due to being a little bit around 500 this year. They had fallen back below the Giants and the Padres, both in the standings and in our power rankings. But the reason why we had them so high at the start of the season is because they had Zach Gallen and Corbin Burnes. And those guys have not been the best version of themselves up to this point in the season, but they were very good in this series. And there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to go up against the Diamondbacks this year when those two guys are 2 of the 3 starting pitchers in the series. And they're going to win a lot of series on the back of those two pitchers. I think that's really what happened here because, the Mets couldn't get anything going against Zach Gallen. He went 6 innings, allowed 2 hits, issued 3 walks, struck out 8. There wasn't any times, actually, throughout the entire start where the Mets got 2 base runners on in the same inning. The only run they get across is Juan Soto hits a solo home run against Gallen in the 6th inning. Other than that, the Mets just got nothing going against Gallen. And Kodai Senga was brilliant in a small sample size. It was honestly one of his worst starts of the season, only because he only gets through 4 innings. But with that, you see the value of Kodai Senga in his ability to bend and not break. He was incredible to walk the tightrope and get out of a couple of really tough jams, particularly in the 3rd inning. The first 2 innings were pretty easy for Senga. He retired the side in order in each inning. The 1st inning, he did give up a leadoff single, but Luis Torrens cut down Corbin Carroll trying to steal second base. So without really any stress through those first 2 innings, the 3rd inning came around. He gives up a pair of singles. He got a strikeout after each of those base hits. So you have 2 runners on, 2 outs. He walks the bases loaded, and then he gets a big strikeout to get out of that jam and strand 3 runners. 4th inning, leadoff walk, gets a ground out, but the Mets weren't quite quick enough to turn 2 on it. It was originally ruled a double play because the umpiring was horrible in this series, but I don't think it really impacted much in the grand scheme of things. Regardless, it ends up coming back on the replay review, so there is a runner on. Senga gives up a couple of base hits. The second one brings home a run. The Mets had a chance to get an out on a play there where the throw should have gone into third. Went into second base. Jeff McNeil hits the runner going to third. They would have had him dead to rights. Didn't matter because Kodai Senga, again, pitched himself out of a jam. Runners at second and third. 1 run already in, 1 out. With another ace going on the other side, this was a moment where the game could have gotten away from the Mets. But Kodai Senga knows how to get out of jams. He pitched carefully against the next batter, ended up walking him to load the bases. Now he's a ground ball away from getting out of the inning. Instead, he gets a pop-up and then a fly out to end the threat. But that inning could have gone a lot differently because Brandon Nimmo did make a great catch at the wall. I don't think it would have been a home run, but it probably would have hit the top of the fence. So a great leaping catch by Nimmo to help Senga get through it. And at that point, he's already passed 80 pitches. The Mets just called it a day. And that's where, the adventure began a little bit with the bullpen. Genesis Cabrera, who came up today, and we'll be talking about that a lot in tomorrow's show, or even a little bit in the final segment here, just the now carousel that is this Mets bullpen all of a sudden. He comes in, gets the first batter out, issues a walk and a double. He has to get yanked. The funny thing about that double is it was off the top of the wall in right center field. And I just happened to be on the phone with somebody I work with at Just Baseball. And I'm watching the game as we're talking. And for the first time this season, I criticized Juan Soto, which is crazy because it was a ball that was nearly a homer. But Soto runs in before he runs back. And I just made a comment to my buddy. I was just like, man, it's an adventure watching Juan Soto play right field. The first time I really think I have voiced any criticism anywhere to anyone about Juan Soto this year, because I've always been holding out to the point of he's going to come around. He's going to come around. He's going to come around. It was just funny that I criticized him to my friend. And then, of course, Juan Soto ends up hitting 2 home runs in this game after that. A little bit of a mistake, but again, it really wasn't one. Max Kranick comes on with a couple runners on. And once you got Kranick and Reed Garrett in the game for the most part settled. Kranick ends up giving up a sac fly, but gets out of a worse jam there. Stayed on a pitch 2 more innings, threw the ball well, but he gives up the solo homer I mentioned earlier. That homer erased the solo homer that Juan Soto hit against Zach Gallen. Then in the 8th inning, Soto homered again, but again, the Diamondbacks erased it as Reed Garrett gave up his solo home run in the 9th inning after that, in the 2nd inning of work. So it was just one of those games where even when Juan Soto did something that made you think the Mets were going to get close, the Diamondbacks slid right back in. And in the next segment, I'm going to talk about where the Mets lost this series, because ultimately, in each of the last 2 games, they had an opportunity against the Diamondbacks bullpen where they had them on the ropes and they just couldn't get the big hit. And unfortunately, Mark Vientos was at the center of it both times. So this is a series that it's probably going to weigh on him a little bit, as if he came through in a couple spots, the Mets win one of those 2 games. Regardless, they end up going into that 9th inning trailing 4-2. Ty Adcock gave us a little bit of an adventure in the 9th inning after Reed Garrett had gotten the first 2 outs, albeit after giving up the home run. But Adcock came on and gave up a single, issued a walk, then a catcher's interference, loaded the bases, and I thought the game was going to completely get away. It didn't. A pop-up ends that inning, but unfortunately the Mets just went down quietly in the 9th inning. They had a real chance in the 8th, though, after Juan Soto's home run, where they had a couple runners in scoring position and an opportunity to, really get back in the game and at least tie it up, the worst case scenario. And for the second night in a row, they just could not get the big hit. I want to talk about that lack of a big hit in this series in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever take your bank account and wonder, where'd all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control of your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start to build wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track your spending, and even plan long-term goals. And manage your money through a partner is smoother than ever, as you can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. If you're watching on YouTube today for the live stream, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 14,000 subscribers. Despite the fact that the Mets went up against Corbin Burnes and Zach Gallen, and both of those guys had really good starts, only giving up 1 run over 6 innings pitched, despite the fact that the Mets, had some struggles with the bullpen, with their bullpen, as this ongoing issue is starting to become more persistent because of AJ Minter being out, Ryan Stanning struggles, and everything else. The Mets had opportunities to win both of these last 2 games. And it's the first time since July of last year they have lost 2 consecutive games at home, which shows how unbelievable this Mets team has been for, whatever it's been now, 10 months. I mean, they've just been awesome. But at some point, you're going to run into one of these teams that's just going to beat you. Unfortunately, the Mets, again, had the opportunities. They just could not get the big hit. Maybe that's a credit to the Diamondbacks. But last night, with the Mets trailing by 2 runs in the ninth inning, they load the bases with nobody out. Mark Vientos has to get a sac fly in that spot. He strikes out. Jesse Winker grounds out. Could be some debate because of this umpire crews. He grounded it out off his foot. Regardless, it was ruled a ground out, not reviewed. And the Mets end up losing eventually on a Francisco Alvarez ground out to end the game, coming up a run short. Similar situation today, where after Juan Soto's home run, which was, again, an unbelievable at bat by Soto. Let's actually take a step back and focus in on that at bat. The one against Zach Gallen was still impressive because Gallen was just dealing. But he got a cutter up and early in the count after looking at one and didn't miss the second one that he saw. The at bat against Ginkel was crazy because he falls behind 0-2. Keeps fouling pitches off, shows that great discipline, looking at some balls outside of the zone, works the count full. Then the ninth pitch of the at bat, he ends up hitting a home run. And it's so impressive when, for one, you have an at bat like that, but when you stack that at bat after the home run he hit a couple innings prior to that, it just shows you what a locked-in Juan Soto can do. And he almost single-handedly did single-handedly bring the Mets back into that game. Unfortunately, they just couldn't get the big hit after that. Pete Alonso drew a walk. Jesse Winker hits one that nearly went out off the top of the fence, but you can't really criticize Pete Alonso for not scoring on it from first base because the Diamondbacks have an incredible outfield and Alek Thomas had a beat on it and just didn't come up with the ball. So Pete did all he could. If you wanted to, you could have sent him, but then you had to play at the plate. The Mets had a situation with runners at second and third and one out, and they were down by a run. So all they needed at that point is Mark Vientos to hit a fly ball, and it's a tie ball game. So a very similar situation. I will say Vientos had the makings of a good at-bat. And what I mean by that is he did fall behind 0-2, but he should be in swing mode, and he fouled off both those pitches, and they were in the zone. Tough pitches, but pitches in the zone, he got a swing at those. Then he worked the count even. He was able to see some pitches outside of the zone and get himself into a better spot. He gets a fastball or a cutter or whatever it was, something hard up in the zone. Really not up in the zone, up and out of the zone. It was ball 3, but I'm not mad at Vientos trying to put a good swing on that because he nearly got the sac fly to right field that the Mets needed at that point. It just ended up tailing and hooking foul. And then at that point, he's still in a good spot, 2-2 count, and he tries to hold on a slider down and away, and you hear the frustration with a big F-bomb as he's walking to the dugout because I think he was locked in. I really do. And I think that was a much better at-bat than the one he had the night before. It's still a bad result, though. He still couldn't hold up. If he holds up, he's sitting 3-2, and for all I know, Mark Vientos hits a 3-run homer and the Mets win this game. I mean, I really liked his approach in that at-bat. I thought he was seeing the ball well. He just didn't get the result you want. He just couldn't hold up. And that's why he was frustrated with himself because, again, if he holds up in that spot, the Mets probably win the game. Instead, he strikes out. And then Brandon Nimmo, who just didn't have a great series. I mean, he was sick. So you wonder how much that was still affecting him. Rough game, though, and he strikes out looking. Francisco Lindor struck out looking to lead off that inning. Either of those guys does something different. There might have been a runner on if Lindor had drawn a walk or gotten a base hit in front of Soto's homer. If Brandon Nimmo swings the bat there, gets a base hit, the Mets could grab a lead. Everything can be different. Unfortunately, it's just one of those series where the Diamondbacks beat them. And granted, Nimmo should have swung the bat, but credit to Ginkel in his sequencing that Nimmo was expecting a slider, and he froze him with a well-located fastball. I mean, you can't just ignore the opposition in this one. And this is a good team. This is not, losing a series against the Marlins and being frustrated. This is not, only taking 2 of 4 against the Nationals where they blew a couple games against a team that they're clearly better than. This is a good Diamondbacks team that ran out their best 2 starting pitchers that, got pretty good relief pitching for the most part. The Mets did miss a couple chances, but that's baseball. You're not going to go and win every single game at home. The Mets started the year 13-1 at Citi Field. At some point, they were going to have to regress back to the mean. That's just how baseball works, unfortunately. It sucks that they have had so many winnable games over this stretch, but that just, again, it's a credit to the Mets as much as it is a knock on them, because it's a credit to Juan Soto for hitting those home runs and making it close. It's a credit to the top of the Mets lineup yesterday, loading the bases in a tough spot in the ninth inning to maybe get back in it. They are always fighting the whole way through the game, and they're never out of one. So all of that is good, and that's where at times you're going to have the miraculous comebacks, and everyone's going to be feeling good. Unfortunately, at other times, guys aren't going to get the big hits. Guys are going to make mistakes out of the bullpen, and things are going to happen. Now, as I was doing the power rankings, for just baseball today, well, tonight or last night, whatever it was, and I was going through all these different teams and looking at where we had them and where we brought them to, and thinking about how this is something we've done every single year at Just Baseball. The first of the month, we canvass the league and we re-rank teams, right? And there's always that balance of what have I seen lately? What do I really feel about this team? And what have they done overall? And I was looking at the Mets and the Phillies in particular, as the Phillies had dropped from wherever we had them 3-9, and the Mets jumped from whatever it was 6-1. And the thing that struck me was, all right, well, the Mets are 3.5 games up on the Phillies right now. They swept them. Now, that series came at home, and the Phillies had to go into a ballpark where they lost the NLDS last year in brutal fashion. That's a tough series for the Phillies. And the Mets carry a lot of momentum into that series, and their crowd was amazing. And all credit to the Mets for beating up on the Phillies and doing a great job to start this season. But do I think the Mets are drastically better than the Phillies? No, I think these are two teams that are going to be in this race all year long. And the Mets are not going to have as much smooth sailing as they did in April. There's going to be some stretches where they have to figure some things out. I think that's where they're at right now. It's pretty remarkable that they made it as long as they did without needing to make a roster move. They made it until that first spot start with Justin Hagenman before they had to make a roster move, and then Minter goes down, and we've seen all of a sudden a carousel taking place in that bullpen. But the Mets went through the first 3 weeks of the season with the same 26 guys, which is really unheard of, because we see so much turnover. Part of that is why they had such a great start, and they got ridiculous pitching out of their bullpen that wasn't sustainable. Does that mean the Mets have a bad bullpen now? No, it just means that they are going through the typical ups and downs of the season. What I want to do here is I have a couple takeaways from this series I want to talk about to close out the show and sort of lead us into the month of May a little bit. So I'll get to those in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Well, crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios, one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you feel fuller longer. When I was prepping for the show and I was watching the end of that game, I was popping some of these Wonderful Pistachios. Give me a little protein pickup as I got ready for the show. I love the no-shells varieties. They're so easy as a grab-and-go snack. This is one of my new favorite flavors, the sea salt and pepper. I love the smoky barbecue as well, the honey roasted. And if you like the in-shell variety for that satisfying crunch, they're a classic favorite that you can find as well. Get snacking and cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. If you are an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways, and you get the lineup graphic sent to your phone each day, so you know it's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be Locked On Mets insider, go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. So, 2 big takeaways from this series, or even we'll say the last week of Mets baseball. The number one takeaway I have, the bullpen is going to be, I don't even want to say a problem, but it's a challenge that has now been presented to the Mets front office that they're trying to figure out. And that's clear. We have seen Chris Devanski, who was it over the weekend? Obviously, Brandon Waddell. We saw him make the spot start. We just saw Ty Adcock and Genesis Cabrera. Who am I forgetting over the weekend? I mean, there's just been so much turnover. Kevin Herget came through at one point. So we're seeing all of the depth from Syracuse making its way up, but those are guys that can struggle. Jose Urena was part of the mix. Was it 3 innings in the blowout on Monday? Big innings from the Mets, honestly. This is what you expect with the final spots in your bullpen to get that turnover. And again, it's impressive that it took this long for the Mets to feel it. But now that you've lost both AJ Minter and Danny Young, you're searching for answers with your lefty reliever spot. And because Minter was a really big high leverage guy for you, you're looking for an answer there. Daniel Nunez will be back up soon. That the Mets are just trying to navigate this thing where they're trying to keep fresh arms in their bullpen in case you need somebody to do some mop-up duty. And they're also trying to, juggle the tightrope of a 6-man rotation for Kodai Senga, or at least needed to get him the rest that would be there if he had a 6-man rotation. And so, as I talked about on the show earlier this week, the Mets have enough off days in May after this. Their next, whatever it is, 4 Thursdays they're off, where Kodai Senga is not going to need any additional rest. It's already built into the schedule. So you have one more spot start that has to happen. Sadly, the Mets are going to have that spot start come in on Sunday. I don't know who's going to make it. Justin Hagenman apparently just went on the IL in Syracuse. I thought it might have been him. Who knows? I don't even know exactly. I'll give you guys more on this when we get more information. So tomorrow's show, I'll look into a little bit deeper, make my prediction on it. But the Mets are in a spot now where they want to get through, I think, that spot start. And once they do, then they can bring Daniel Nunez up and not worry about needing a roster spot when you have, let's say you needed to send him back down, or instead you had to send down Huascar Braziban or Max Kranick, you lose those guys for 2 weeks. So I think they're just trying to get through this week, and then Nunez is going to come into the fold, and we'll see if he can be the guy he was last year to get them at another high leverage option. If he can, I think that'll settle the bullpen a little bit. And then they'll just try to find that lefty. Felipe De La Cruz just got called up from AA to AAA. I talked about him a bit on yesterday's show. To me, that is an indication the Mets are considering him being the lefty that can come up. They might fast track this kid. I'll talk about him a little bit more in the coming days because he might be a bulk left-hander reliever the Mets could call on. This is where David Stearns makes his money. This is where David Stearns proves that he is the best executive in baseball, by finding some arms. They are, I'm sure, scouring the minor leagues, trying to find guys who are maybe pushing up on an option date. And for a lot of people, the end of April, this is a time where they can opt out of their contracts if they get an MLB offer. So I'm sure the Mets are going to be looking around, trying to find maybe a veteran lefty like an Andrew Chafin. I saw Mike Mayer of Metsmerize point him out today as a potential fit. They're going to be looking around and seeing, and I would just give this front office a week or even 10 days. Give them until the off day. So we'll give them just a week until next Thursday to see what the picture looks like in the bullpen. And I think they can figure it out because ultimately they still have 6 guys that have largely thrown the ball well this year, with Edwin Diaz, Reed Garrett, Ryan Stanek. Last week hasn't been great, but overall he's been okay. And he's got a track record. And then you got Budo, Braziban, and Kranick, who Budo is another guy that's had his downs, but ultimately these are guys that can be effective out of the bullpen. So you just got to figure out those final couple pieces. So the big takeaway is this is an ongoing conversation that we're going to keep on having about this Mets bullpen until they figure it out. But I trust the guy that is calling the shots to find the answers. And I also think this bullpen is still in way better shape than it ever was last year, because there was a lot of times last year where it was just, you kind of trusted Edwin Diaz, but you didn't. And then you were just grasping for straws. And there was points where Daniel Nunez was great, or Phil Maton was great, or Jose Budo was great, but they never really had more than a couple guys going at one time. For the Mets this year, they certainly have had that, and I think they'll continue to have that, because I don't see any reason why a Kranick, a Braziban, or Reed Garrett, any of those guys are necessarily going to fade back. Now, the other big takeaway I have from watching the Mets play baseball over the last week, I think this lineup is close to turning a corner. They've been carried in a large part by Pete Alonso and Francisco Lindor, and then just timely hits by guys like Luis Torrens, and Jesse Winker's had his moments, and Luis Angel Acuna obviously had gotten off to a great start this season. I think that Alonso and Lindor are going to continue to give you good at-bats all year. They just look so locked in. It's like they've both picked up from where they left off last year. Pete with his dominant run through the playoffs. Francisco Lindor, his dominant everything from June on last year. They look right back in that prime form, and I'm not too worried about them. Juan Soto has a 2-home run game. If he gets going, he can carry your lineup. And I feel like we have seen Brandon Nimmo and Mark Vientos, even though they both blew it today, I feel like they've been trending in a better direction. Nimmo had the monster game against the Nationals. Vientos has hit safely in a lot of games recently, going from a absolutely dreadful start where he was just as bad as Brett Beatty was, really. And he's starting to get closer and closer to the guy we've come to know. We'll see, though. We'll see if he can. I think you got to give Mark Vientos enough leash to at least go through May. And if at the end of May, if there is struggles, then maybe we're going to start to open up a conversation about some of the guys in the minors that can help, with Brett Beatty in AAA still and Ronnie Mauricio, hopefully at that point up at AAA. But for now, Vientos is the guy. And even though this series you could put on his shoulders, I still have seen signs that are promising. He homered against Corbin Burns just yesterday. Didn't have a great game outside of that, but he still got a pitch to hit and didn't miss it. And today, like I said, he was so close to a good at-bat in a big spot. If he just holds that check swing, he's sitting 3-2. He's going to get a pitch to hit. And I think he does damage on it. He just missed it. So we'll see. If you get Vientos and Nimmo going, then you have that 1-5 that we talked about before the season that's as good as anybody. Winker's giving you some good at-bats. Acuna, McNeil, Alvarez, Torrens. I still think this is a deep and talented lineup that can start to bash their way to some wins, which will take some pressure off of that bullpen and even the starting rotation to some extent, which should get the Mets going. And maybe they continue to win, but they start winning in a different way. In April, they won on the backs of some absurd pitching that was probably better than you can anticipate in any other month this season. It was just that good. You're going to have more struggles than the Mets did, but I don't think it has to go completely 180. I think they can still be a very good team that is pitching games well with good starting pitching and getting outs in big spots with a couple of the high leverage arms they have. It's just sometimes you're going to run into a series like this where your bullpen gives up runs and you don't score on the opposing bullpen and you just come up a bit short. But the Mets have won every other series they played at home this season, and they had a chance to win this one. Now they'll hit the road. We'll see what they do in St. Louis and in Arizona. On tomorrow's show at 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to have your typical episode of Locked On Mets. I'll probably dive into this bullpen situation a little bit more. Maybe I'll try to look at some of the options the Mets have externally unless something happens. Who knows? Maybe I'm talking about Andrew Chafin's a Met because in a couple hours we're going to find out that the Mets have already made a trade to make that happen. So we'll see exactly what the news brings us to have a good show tomorrow. But I'm also going to be looking at the farm system again because there's a lot to like there. And now that we have an opportunity with me already kind of covering this game on today's show, we'll touch on some of that stuff as well. So make sure you don't miss out on that show. Hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube right now. If you're listening to the playback of this or you're rewatching on YouTube, again, subscribe, follow wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure that you follow me on social at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel. Covers everything in the world of sports. Locked On MLB today. Locked On Today. We can find our local hosts from each team covering everything from the NBA playoffs to the NHL playoffs to the MLB season. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.